Hey, I'm so glad you're here. I'm Angela. My co-host is Jai. Thank you so much for joining us on the inaugural episode of The Deepening Place. We're jumping in with really zero experience and we're learning by doing. We still have a long way to go. Here at The Deepening Place, we're going to speak freely in love. We're going to have conscious conversations, sometimes about difficult subjects. And we're going to interview people, champions who are paying the price to be free. I hope you'll look for my interview with Patrick Spencer at Truly Spartan to be released soon. If you'd like to contact me, please visit my website, angelaabide.com, and you can find Jai Turk on LinkedIn. Hope you enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to The Deepening Place. This is Angela Abide. I'm here with Jai Turk.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Jai's not feeling well today. He has a bit of a cold, so his voice might sound funny. Well, first of all, Jai, I wanted to say something to you. Happy anniversary.
Is it the 1 year mark already?
Yeah, yesterday
Really?
was the 1 year ago that we met attending a conference. Do you remember?
It was the Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color conference hosted at Houston Tillotson, I believe.
Wow,
And
you're good.
It was the Are the Children Well was the premise.
We had a big meeting like in the auditorium and people spoke, and then we had some breakout sessions. And the breakout session that I went to, I walked in the room. It was kind of a cafeteria type setting. And I saw you when I walked in, and there was a seat by you, but my introverted self just couldn't stand it. So I kept walking, went to the back of the room and sat down by myself. And a few minutes later, whoever was hosting the meeting, started making everybody that was in the back come forward so that we could have a more intimate group.
Yep.
And so it turns out that I sat in that chair I wanted to sit in the first place. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
I think you had already introduced yourself to the table or to me, and you said something about psychology. And my initial reaction was, here's someone else that has gone to the field of psychology, but has probably interacted with some spiritual work in their life. Because I believe the session we were in was a spirituality session of some sort.
Yeah, it probably was. And the reason I was there in the first place was to try to meet people. So that's kind of a way in the past I've tried to build community, to lean in toward things that I'm interested in. And race has always been an interest of mine. So when I saw that, I knew I wanted to try to go if I could.
Us meeting there is kind of relevant to this podcast because you neither work in a school nor have a boy of color. And I think it's that type of cross difference is it's probably what we're getting at here. Showing up to spaces where you traditionally don't show up at all to hear a totally different perspective. Last night I went to something similar for a group in town called Measure, and they do things for Black girls, and it's really pretty heavily focused on girls. I felt really out of place originally, like extremely out of place. And then I kind of just got comfortable with that feeling out of place.
Why did you feel out of place?
Well, first, there was predominantly women in the room, and a lot of the initiatives I have no firsthand experience with. I have a younger sister, but that's about it. It's not my lived life, not my lived experience.
Appreciating someone's vision and what they're trying to accomplish in the world too, just showing up sometimes is really encouraging. And
I agree. I agree.
The particular area of town I live in is not very diverse at all. So for me to lean into diversity means I've got to be a little bit intentional about it. It's not just going to happen. And I feel like what you're saying with your meeting last night is something similar. You see somebody, you can appreciate what they're trying to do, and you kind of lean in to see if there's something you can glean.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess for me, I don't always want to say relevant or prevalent, but gender is another one, or the perceived dichotomy between man and woman. That's something else that I know we'll end up discussing here how I think a lot of people have some dichotomy that they've interacted with in their life and have tried to challenge it. And I think both you and I connect because we step into that place where you do challenge those things. What you learn or experience is still like very shocking. Like when you talked about being at the table with Richard and how you just sat there silently. Chasing that dichotomy can be really difficult. And last night was a good firsthand knowledge experience of me of what it's like to try to sit in that uncomfortable space. And I hope we can share that articulately through this podcast too.
Yeah, you mentioned Richard. That's another group that I've found here. It's a community group that I call it the Tribal Council. We sit and eat tacos, hopefully every week. Sometimes it works out being once a month. I've been able to sit and learn so much from people who are different than me, and it's very humbling that they accept me and allow me to be there. So yeah, sometimes it's really scary to show up, but I think if we one of my main goals for this podcast is to be able to have conscious conversations about topics that people lose their minds over and are so polarized, and
Mm.
our dualistic mind gets into play and we have to decide something's right or wrong. And I think that's really been detrimental to our sense of community, not just on a personal level, but even go out into your home and your communities, and even our country right now is so divided. And part of that reason is because we can't sit down and just have a conversation. We're stuck in our mind and our ego that makes us decide if something's right or wrong. So that prevents us from actually hearing and seeing another person. When we decide someone is wrong, then it's easy for us to X them out and strip them of their humanity. And then we're capable of all kinds of darkness. And I really see that on both sides of the political spectrum right now. Depending on what side of the political spectrum you relate to, you think that's only possible for the other side. We've talked about a lot that having this refuge in the desert, so to speak, I mean, when people are ready to let go of their attachment to their belief, it necessitates a walk in the desert. Part of the reason for this podcast is to establish a home in the desert, a place where you can get a glass of water and feel refreshed and have some of those conversations that lead beyond just knowledge to wisdom.
I don't think, and actually, I don't think, in my experience, not many people are aware of what that means or what that even is. Some people seem to take it very literally, like they're saving up for a big retreat or they go to the jungle or something like that. I mean, that sounds great and it probably works, but it's not really accessible or really feasible. And sometimes you have to go in and out of that desert over and over. I hope we can share some practical tools. I know we can. So in this podcast, I hope we can resonate with people with some practical tools you and I use regularly, both personally and in our practices as wellness people, that people can take that journey, that trip to the desert from wherever they are, because really it's just about accessing your internal. And I think that speaks to the point you were saying, or speaks to the point you were talking about when you said people can only recognize making that change in the other. You're on the other side and you need to make the change and see what I see. Taking that trip to the desert does help you do that for yourself. So is there anything in particular you think the audience could get out of today?
I think with what we've said about being a seeker, looking for your group, searching for a tribe, feeling lonely and alone in this dualistic world, if you feel like you can see, or if you would like to be able to see. I think there's so many people who they're looking around like, am I in the twilight zone? It seems like the whole world is going crazy. I really would hope to throw a lifeline to those people as well and say, no, it's not you. It is the world. And I think, we've talked about the Matrix before, and I think that would definitely be a great episode coming up, talking about your Matrix moment. What was it for you?
Oof, I would have to say my first Matrix moment was sometime in childhood, sometime at a young age in school, in early elementary school. And I realized adults were people. And that's when the kind of the power schematics of the world didn't really start making much more sense. And combined with what I was learning in school, didn't really gel with the thoughts that ran through my mind about the world. Learning school subject materials didn't really seem that important as a person. It seemed better that we learn how to take care of each other and stop bickering and fighting and things like that. So that was my first Matrix moment. Seemed like we just had the wrong programming going on. And I probably was around 8 or 9 years old, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
So I was born and raised in New Orleans, in the Seventh Ward, New Orleans proper. I'm the oldest of three siblings. I grew up with my mom and dad in the house, and my grandmother who lived with schizophrenia, lived with us. She lived across the street sometimes, and for a few years she lived in the home with us. Um, School was really easy and a breeze for me growing up. I grew up in parochial school in New Orleans. It was cheap and kind of the thing everyone did. School stopped kind of mattering for me around the age that I mentioned earlier, around third or fourth grade. Our neighborhood just got bad. It was really inflicted with poverty, and my home was, and my family was inflicted with, people with uh, anxiety and substance abuse problems. So life was a difficult journey between age of 10 and 14. There was a lot to figure out, and in that time I kind of really centered myself, and I stopped being so concerned about what was being taught to me in a book and tried to start making sense of the whole picture. I lived in the hood, what people call the hood, and I went to a predominantly white and middle to upper class school. And so kind of fast forward, I went to LSU in Louisiana, that's in Baton Rouge, and I went there because I had an in-state scholarship, and I played band. I played in the band. I played snare drum, and in high school I was, first chair all state, senior year, the whole nine. I was a superstar band kid. So I went on to college and did the impossible there. I got in. I got into the snare line at LSU the first year. Um,
Hey, can I just pause for a minute and say go Tigers?
Go Tiger! That's what I'm talking about. Going to college was going to a whole new world for me. On top of poverty and that stuff growing up for me, my mom was from a community or her family in the community didn't really leave that 2 square mile radius most of her whole life. And so when I got to college, everything was new. Dating girls, I didn't have a license, I didn't have a car, I had never been allowed to have a job. I mean, everything you name was new. That was my first time really spending too long away from the house, like at night. My first few years of college was a whole nother rebirthing. And when it came time to graduate college, I decided to go into teaching. And I did that because all my volunteer hours in high school were educating young kids on, daycares, babysitting, helping my mom with her preschool at home, those things. So I decided to teach music in Baton Rouge for a year. And then I moved out here to Texas in 2013, to Austin. And I became a high school percussion director here. I did that because it was time for me to really take the next stage in life, take the next step. I was ready to tap into my own power. And I knew to do that, I couldn't do it in Louisiana. Literally, they didn't have salary positions in what I was doing at the time, and I wanted that level of stability for myself. So I did that. I came out here and kind of once again, this is my first time having a full-time job, a whole bunch of firsts. That job is a story in and of itself, but what I learned about that, or what I learned about myself in the first job I had here, was that I'm called to answer for justice and well-being in this world, whether I choose to or not. And it's very hard to explain to people, but I learned that in that job for several reasons.
You have a call for justice, a call for well-being and justice in the world.
Yes, there was a lot of corruption I saw at that job, and not just about that school district in particular, but about corruptions within the American systems, and for that matter, probably human-centered systems. There's a lot of aspects of the system that don't encourage justice or well-being. And I learned that in every job or every role, any space I was in, I kept seeing the problems that led to those. I kept seeing the causes of those problems pop up, and I just couldn't ignore them. So I left teaching in 2016. I took a break. I drove for rideshare, and I decided to find out. I tried some different spiritual practices, and I learned it was time to go back to graduate school and learn how to meld that purpose I had of answering justice and well-being for the world and put that into a real context, something I can achieve in the practical landscape I'm in. I'm in America, I'm in Austin, et cetera, et cetera. So I landed at St. Edward's, received my master's in the science of leadership and change. And it didn't take me too long in that program to really figure it out. It was a snowball of positive change, which I call evolution. I really evolved while I was in the program. And then I finally had you could almost call it a death moment. I had been driving rideshare for 2 years. I was in college. I was in graduate school. I was making pretty decent money. And one day someone rear-ended me, totaled my car. I don't get shook very easily. It wasn't my first time being in a car accident, but that one shook me. And the message came up really the next day, this time. So from there, I thought, sorry.
Wait, when you say the message came up, is that just a feeling you had in your heart? Did you see it in a neon sign in your dream?
Whatever guides me spiritually, and I don't really have a name for it, will put a message into my head, and it's not my own voice. It's really no voice, but words will.
Like an impression or something?
Think of an impression. Really, just it's not it's not an audible sound. It's just think of white letters running through your skull. Think of it running through like your forehead, and that's really how I experienced it. Was
Okay.
go ahead and do what you think you're here to do.
Were you going back to the call for well-being and justice? Did you know that's what it was about, or what did you think it meant?
You've learned enough skills in school. You've made a community. You've realized your purpose. It's time to start walking that way. And so that did mean to figure out how I can bring justice and well-being to the world right now, starting right now with some small steps. And so I decided to go back into education at a different front now. I had the paperwork I needed, so I got a leadership position at an after-school site for the YMCA, and at the same time, I got into something called comprehensive tutoring, which borders on a psychological practice of sorts, or a counseling practice, really, for families and for the students in those families. And I was doing both of those things simultaneously. And after just a few months of doing the tutoring and realizing I really knew how to lead a team, I decided it's time to do that on a larger scale. And I opened up a nonprofit, and fast forward to now, I do lead some tutors. We are working on programming to educate families, as I've been personally doing in that other practice. And so from that moment, it has been this snowball effect of I'm bringing justice and bringing systems for justice and peace to the world since then. And it's not a roller coaster, because a roller coaster is safe. You're probably not going to fall off. So I don't like that analogy too much. It's been a true adventure where there's some real pain points, some real loss, and some real gains as well.
Yeah, so like a continual walk in the desert where you occasionally hit a oasis.
That's a great way to, yes, yes. And right now I'd say I'm at about, I think the tables have really turned in 2020. I'm able to live in the oasis and recognize when I need to take a trip to the desert more often. Sometimes I wander, and sometimes I
Yeah.
just end up there because I'm made a minor mistake or something. But I really am able to live in the oasis. You are walking a path in this life. If I could really summarize, you are walking a path. And if you're really conscious about where you're going and you allow life to, as I've allowed my life to lead me down where I want to go and make sure that's for my purpose, I get less concerned about when I'm in the desert or not. And for me, that's a higher level of being in the oasis. It's your own. I can treat myself like a temple.
When you're really in the zone, so to speak, the desert almost is like a welcome invitation. Sometimes it feels good to take a couple of laps to recenter and knock off some of the barnacles.
I agree, and it reminds me of martial arts or boxing or anything where you challenge yourself. But it reminds me of those because in boxing, say for example, when I'm sparring, as soon as it gets really hot and you get really tired, that's when you're supposed to start going at 100%. So the coach always says, get ready for the heat, you live in the heat. Get ready for the heat, you live in the heat. So I welcome it, and it's changed my entire paradigm for working out and having like control of my body is what it really translates to out of boxing. And I think this desert metaphor, it has been a way for me to do that for my spirit and for my soul. I welcome the challenges. Like I'm very thankful for when I get faced with a challenge, because I honestly believe that if you're still here and the challenge presents itself, there's a way to solve it, or there's at least a way to manage it and use it for your own growth. And by growth, I mean, I'm referring back to that path, walking further along in your path.
A couple of things you said. If you were my client, I would give you a therapy gold star, because I'm not sure if you're familiar with the four agreements.
I don't think so.
Well, the four agreements are by Don Miguel Ruiz, are be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make any assumptions, and do your best. And so when you're doing the best you can in your life and you're driving that car and you get into a wreck and it shakes you up, if you got stuck taking that personally, like woe is me, you wouldn't have had space for the revelation of it's time. And just allowing things to be as they are in your life opens the door for new possibilities. Sometimes we label things as good and bad. And usually it's like, I don't know. I don't know if this is good or bad. I'm going to let it be what it is. I'm just going to keep walking. That was a great example of that. You didn't argue with it. You didn't make an assumption about it. You just let it be what it is. And the other thing that you pointed out, this is something I really hope to get across, is that, we have to learn to manage our mind and emotions so that we can go to that deeper place. And that's the name of this podcast, the deepening place. And the reason that we do that is so that we can understand what our word is, what our purpose is, what our vision is. And for you got your vision, the call for well-being and justice, but then you have to back up and you're so far away from it. And you see that there's kind of like this swamp between you and the vision, and you have to walk it out. And you did. And it involved a lot of little deaths. And I think that's what people don't realize, is that the road to enlightenment, the road to peace, the road to that peace that passes understanding and joy unspeakable is a descent. It's not an ascent. You have to be willing to give everything so that you can access that word that we all have. And so that was a really beautiful example of that. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you for the gold star.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
When you had that realization that things are corrupt, you have to have the freedom to say that without fear. And that's how you let people see what your purpose is and your mission is. And that's really how we change the world. So getting to that point where you can die to the opinions of others and being afraid what people are going to think, but you are true to yourself and true to your word. That's a great goal for everybody, I think.
I think it would make the world a different place, not even better. It would be a totally different place if we pursued a place of, well, not just not having fear, because unfortunately I interact with some people who do speak from the heart and speak fearlessly, and they're talking a bunch of nonsense. I'm not sure what that is yet. But I do agree with your point that if you can really speak from a place of fear and honesty and take in other truths as well, not only put out truth, but accept someone else's truth, then I believe we're really going somewhere.
That point you just made about I'm not really sure what's going on there. I consider him to be my spiritual father, Richard Rohr, has the Center for Action and Contemplation. And he talks a lot about if you don't transform your pain, you're destined to transmit it. A lot of people wake up and see, but they don't do their desert work. You end up, instead of transforming that descent, the death, and getting to the point where you can get that nugget, that gold, that your purpose, your word, and then rise up and present that to the world. A lot of people just go right on to action without the contemplation. And because of that, they're just continuing the cycle of hurt and in some cases abuse. So it's really important to have your desert moment, to do the deepening work so that you can be useful.
If you don't, what was the phrase again from Richard Rohr? If you don't
transform your pain, you're destined to transmit it. All of our good intentions without that deepening work are gonna fall short because it's just still ego based. and it's not coming from the deeper place, that deeper consciousness.
That hits home. That's great.
Yeah, he sends out a daily email. He is a Catholic father. I'm not sure if he's a priest. He's in the Franciscan order. So for people who are really sensitive to that, it might not be the best place to start. But if you're kind of in the middle and feel like you can glean, or if you're Christian or Catholic, you might really appreciate his work. It's the Center for Action and Contemplation. So you can find them online.
Yeah, okay.
Well, Jai, I really appreciate the time, and I'm glad you powered through and you joined us today, even though you don't feel good.
You're very welcome. I've been excited to do it, really. So it's worth doing it. Not feeling so great.
To follow me, I'm at angelaabide.com or on social media at angelaabide. Jai, do you have...
The best place to find me right now would just be on LinkedIn. And you can find me Jai Turk on LinkedIn, JYETURK.
Okay, thank you so much. And again, happy anniversary and go Tigers.
Happy anniversary. Go Tigers.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.